time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, I left W Hollow for Winston. I walked briskly over the frozen snow that crunched beneath my feet. I faced the unmerciful December wind. It whipped my clothes, it stung my face, but I knew I would not get cold, for I was carrying a load of 20 books I had borrowed for my pupils. They had already read all of my books. I was also carrying a limited supply of clothes. I couldn't bring all the clothes I wanted to bring because the books occupied most of the space in my suitcase. I was on my way over the frozen snow, beneath a sunless sky, facing a terrific wind, and I would go all the way this time in daylight. I wouldn't make the mistake I'd made before. Despite the frigid wind, the sunless sky, the crunching frozen snow, I was carrying a load that would keep me warm. I took the near cut across the Seton Ridge. This would save me 3 miles, and when I reached the Seton Ridge, I had never faced such a biting wind as blew from the north. I was glad to get over the ridge and down to the Sandy River Turnpike. It was much warmer down in the Sandy River Valley. Here I had hopes of catching a ride, but I walked on and on along the slick turnpike. The road plows hadn't scooped away the ice on the road. It was still there. I never met a person on the Sandy River Turnpike. Then I reached Raccoon. I walked all the way, hoping against hope that I would catch a ride. Though perspiration stood on my face, my body was chilled by the wind, and if I stopped 30 seconds, the perspiration dried on my face. When I reached the top of Raccoon Hill, I looked at my watch. It was 12 noon. I had 6 miles to go. I had walked 11 miles in 3 hours. If I hadn't been loaded and the turnpike hadn't been ice-coated, I could have walked faster. This was slow time. I took a sandwich from my coat pocket Mom had made me bring along. I was surprised to find it frozen, but I was hungrier than I thought. The frozen sandwich tasted good. I ate it as I walked on the Laurel Ridge Road. If ever in my life I had felt a velocity of frigid wind, it was on this road. It went through my overcoat and through my clothes. I thought the terrific force of this wind would lift me up from the road over into the Tiber Valley. I felt the cold as I had never felt it before. My hands and feet ached. Water ran from my eyes. Before I had walked 3 miles along Laurel Ridge, I would get behind a big tree here and there to serve as a windbreak so I could warm. Often I stood behind a rock cliff for a windbreak. The cold was doing something to my body and my senses. Friday night sleeping in a fodder shack was warm in comparison. Finally, I reached the path where I left the ridge. I was almost too stiff to bend over to get between the fence wires. I wondered if I could go on to Baylor's. Once I sat down on the snow. I thought of leaving my suitcase and trying to run to warm my body. As I walked and ran slowly down the mountain, stepping in my own dim footprints I had made Friday, my senses came to me enough to make me realize I had to go on. I couldn't stop now. If I did, I'd soon be a goner. The thought of sitting down again scared me. I hadn't any feeling in my feet. I felt as if I was stepping with wooden feet. My numb, lifeless hand felt chained to my suitcase. I reached Baylor's at 2:30. It had taken me 2.5 hours to cover the last 6 miles. If it hadn't been for Otis Baylor, I believe to this day my hands and feet would have been frozen. The first thing he did was take the suitcase from my hand, and then he pulled off my gloves and shoes. I couldn't. He poured ice-cold water into a tub and had me put my feet in the water. I couldn't feel the water with my feet. He had me put my hands in a pan of ice-cold water. I couldn't feel the water with my hands. In a few minutes, Lucretia brought hot water, and Otis tempered the water gradually until a little feeling came back to my hands and feet. He tempered the water more and more feeling came to my hands and feet. He continued this process until the water was approximately body temperature. The normal feeling to my hands and feet was restored. "I don't know why you had to go to Lansboro on a day like last Friday," Otis Baylor said. when I started putting on my socks. Then you come back here on the coldest day I have ever seen in my life. I wouldn't have slept out on a night like last Friday night when it was 12 below in the valley, nor have walked back here from Lansboro on a day like this for this farm. Why did you do it? Then you know about me getting lost last Friday, I said. Everybody knows about it around Winston, he answered. Everybody's talking about it. Not anybody can understand why you did it, he added thoughtfully as I slipped my feet back into my shoes. You must have a girl in Lansboro, Lucretia laughed. Here is why I did it, I said, as I opened my suitcase. I'll show you. See these books? I went after these for your boys and for the pupils in my high school. Smartest pupils I ever taught. Then Otis looked at Lucretia, and Lucretia looked at Otis. I did something else, too. You'll hear about it in a month from now, I added. I went to see Superintendent Anderson about a little matter. You're not resigning from Winston High School, are you? Otis asked. Oh, no, I answered. I wouldn't think of it. When I told my pupils about a scholastic contest with Lansboro High School, I watched their expressions. They were willing and ready for the challenge. The competitive spirit was in them. We must review everything we have covered in our textbooks, I told them. We must cover more territory in our textbooks, too. Hold up your right hands if you're willing. Every pupil raised his hand. Right then, we started to work. In addition to regular assignments, my pupils began reviewing all of the old assignments we had covered. Despite the challenge ahead and all the reviewing and study we planned to do, we never stopped play. The Tiber River was frozen over. The ring of skates and merry laughter broke the stillness of the winter nights. We skated on the white winding ribbon of ice beneath the high, cold winter moon. Often we'd skate until midnight. We'd hear the wind blow mournfully over the great white silence that surrounded us and sing lonesome songs without words in the barren branches of the bankside trees. And we'd hear the foxes barking high up on the walls of sheltering cliffs, mocking the music of our ringing skates. Over the weekends, we'd go to Tiber where we'd cut holes in the ice and gig fish. The boys and I would rabbit hunt up and down the Tiber Valley in the old stubble fields, now covered with snow and swept by wind. We'd track minks, possums, raccoons, weasels, and foxes to their dens. We'd climb the mountains and get spills over the rocks into the deep snow. This took our minds from books and taught us another kind of education. It was as much fun as reading books. Now that a big contest was before us, we needed diversion. And we got it. Our state was not usually cold enough for winter sports. This winter was an exception, and we took full advantage of it. When we hunted, the girls didn't go with us, but when we skated, fished, and rode sleighs, they went along. There was a long, gentle slope not far from the schoolhouse we found ideal for sleighs. It was almost a mile to the end of our sleigh run. We went over the riverbank and downstream for many yards on the Tiber ice. We rode sleighs during the noon hour before and after school. On winter days, when the snow had melted, leaving the dark earth a sea of sloppy mud, we designed floor games for our little one-room school. They were simple games such as throwing bolts in small boxes, and we played darts. We also played a game called Fox and Goose. We made our fox and goose boards, and we played with white, yellow, and red grains of corn. We had to make our own recreation. I never saw a distracted look on a pupil's face. I never heard one complain that the short, dark winter days were boresome because there wasn't anything to do. I think each pupil silently prayed for the days to be longer. We were a united little group. We were small, but we were powerful. We played hard and we studied hard. We studied and played while the December days passed. That day in early January, we dismissed school. This was the first time we had dismissed for anything. We had never lost an hour. I had actually taught more hours than was required. This was the big day for us. It was too bad that another blizzard had swept our rugged land and that a stinging wind was smiting the valleys and the hills. But this didn't stop the boys and me from going. Leona Maddox, my best Latin pupil, couldn't go along. Her father, Alex Maddox, wouldn't let her ride a mule 17 miles to Lansboro to compete in a contest on a day like this. I couldn't persuade him to let her go. On that cold, blizzardy morning, Budge Waters rode his mule to school very early and built a fire in the pot-bellied stove. When the rest of us arrived on our mules at approximately 7 o'clock, Budge had the schoolroom warm. We tied our mules to the fence, stood before the fire, and warmed ourselves before we started on our journey. Then we unhitched our mules from the fence and climbed into the saddles. Little clouds of frozen snow and powdery puffs arose from the mules' hoofs as 6 pupils and their teacher rode down the road. Though the force of wind in the Tiber Valley was powerful, it was at our backs. The wind was strong enough to give our mules more momentum. We made good time until we left the valley and climbed the big hill. Here we faced the wind. It was a whipping wind, stinging, biting wind on this mountain that made the water run from our eyes and our mules' eyes, but for us there was no turning back. We were going to Lansboro High School. That was that. We were determined to meet this big school, big to us, for they outnumbered us 26-1. Soon we were down in Hinton Valley. Then we rode to the top of Raccoon Hill, where we faced the stinging wind again. "Mr. Stuart, I've been thinking," Budge Waters said as we rode along together. "If you can sleep in a fodder shock when it's 12 degrees below zero, we can take this contest from Lansboro High School. I've not forgotten how you walked 17 miles to carry us books. All of your pupils remember, we'll never let you down." Budge Waters thought of this because we were riding down the mountain where I had slept that night. Then we rode down into Raccoon Valley, and Billy Leonard, only 13 years old, complained of numbness in his hands, feet, and lips. He said he felt as if he was going to sleep. I knew what he was talking about. I had had the same feeling the day Otis Baylor had put my hands and feet in cold water. We stopped at a home, tied our mules to the fence, and went in and asked to warm. Bert Patton, a stranger to us, piled more wood on the open fire until we were as warm as when we had left the schoolhouse. We told him who we were and where we were going. "On a day like this?" he said, shaking his head sadly. We climbed into the saddles again. We were over halfway now. The second hitch would put us at Lansboro High School. We had valley all the way to Lansboro, with walls of rugged hills on each side for windbreaks. At 11 o'clock, we rode across the Lansboro High School yard and hitched our mules to the fence around the athletic field. There were faces against the window panes watching us. Then we walked inside the high school, where Principal Ernest Charters met and welcomed us. He told us that he was surprised we had come on a day like this and that we had been able to arrive so soon. In the principal's office, my pupils and I huddled around the gas stove while we heard much laughter in the high school corridors. The Lansboro High School pupils thought we were a strange-looking lot. Many came inside their principal's office to take a look at us. We were regarded with curiosity, strangeness, and wonder. Never before had these pupils seen 7 mules hitched to their schoolyard fence. Never before had they competed scholastically with so few in number, competitors who had reached them by muleback. The Lansboro High School principal didn't feel about the contest the way we felt. To him, this was just a setup to test his pupils for the district contest, which would soon be held. He told me this when he went after the sealed envelopes that held the questions. We warmed before the gas stove while he made arrangements for the contest. "These questions were made out by the State Department of Education," he said when he returned. "I don't know how hard they are." My pupils stood silently by the stove and looked at each other. We were asked to go to one of the largest classrooms. A Lansboro High School teacher had charge of giving the test. When the Lansboro High School pupils came through the door to compete against my pupils, we knew why Principal Charters had selected this large classroom. My pupils looked at each other, then at their competitors. I entered red-headed Jesse Jarvis to compete with 10 of their plain geometry students. I entered Billy Leonard against 21 of their selected algebra students. Budge, you'll have to represent us in grammar, English literature, and history, I said, and I believe I'll put you in civil government. Is that all right? Yes, he agreed. Budge had never had a course in civil government. All he knew about it was what he had read in connection with history. Robert Batson, you enter in history and grammar. Robin Baylor, you enter in algebra. Snooky Baylor, you enter in algebra and plain geometry. Sorry, Mr. Charters, I said, we don't have anyone to enter in Latin. My best Latin pupil, Leona Maddox, couldn't make this trip. After the contest had begun, I left the room. Miss Bertha Madden was in charge. I took our mules to Walter Scott's barn on the east end of Lansboro, where I fed and watered them. With the exception of an interval when the contestants ate a quick lunch, the contest lasted until 2:30 p.m. I had one pupil, Budge Waters, in 4 contests. I had planned to enter him in 2. Just as soon as Budge had finished with civil government, we started grading the papers. All the pupils were requested to leave the room. We graded the papers with keys. Mr. Charters, Miss Madden, and 2 other teachers and I did the grading. Mr. Charters read the answers on the keys and we checked the answers. Once or twice we stopped long enough to discuss what stiff questions these were. We wondered how far we would have gotten if we, all of us college graduates, had taken the same test. One of the teachers asked me while we graded these papers if Budge Waters had ever seen these questions before. When we were through grading the papers, Mr. Charters called the contestants into the classroom. I want to read you the scores of this contest, Principal, Charters said. His voice was nervous. Budge Waters, winner in English literature. Budge Waters, winner in grammar. Budge Waters, winner in history with almost a perfect score. Budge Waters, winner in civil government. Why didn't you bring just this one boy? Principal Charters asked me. Because I've got other good pupils, I quickly retorted. Billy Leonard, winner in algebra, with plenty of points to spare. Jesse Jarvis, second in plain geometry, lost by 1 point. Snooky Baylor and Robin Baylor tied for second place in algebra. Congratulations, said Principal Charters, to your pupils and to you on your success. It looks as though Winston High will represent this county in the district scholastic contest. I've never heard of such a remarkable thing. When we left the Lansboro High School, we heard defeated pupils crying because a little mud hole in the road like Winston beat us. In a few minutes, our mule cavalcade passed the Lansboro High School. Faces were against the window panes, and many pupils waved jubilantly to us as we rode by, our coattails riding the wind behind our saddles and the ends of our scarves bright banners on the wind. We rode victoriously down the main street of Lansboro on our way home. The news of our victory over Lansboro High School spread like wildfire in dry autumn leaves. It was talked about in every home up and down the Tiber Valley. Alex Maddox told his neighbor he regretted now he hadn't let Leona go with us. The victory of our little school over Lansboro High School was not only talked about up and down the Tiber Valley, but the length and breadth of Greenwood County. Superintendent Anderson told his rural teachers, and the rural teachers told their pupils, and their pupils told their parents, and in this way the news reached the entire county. Everybody was proud of us because we were the smallest of the rural high schools and the only one that had ever thought to challenge the scholastic standing of the large Lansboro High School. Soon we gave our Superintendent Anderson, his rural teachers, and the people of Greenwood County additional pleasant news. Billy Leonard and Budge Waters entered the district scholastic contest. Budge Waters won 3 contests, grammar, history, and civil government. Billy Leonard won first place in algebra. Then Billy Leonard took pneumonia fever and couldn't go to the state contest. Budge Waters went alone and captured 2 first places, history and grammar. I knew my judgment of my pupils wasn't wrong. I thought about the normal curve system. I was convinced a good teacher recognized ability of his pupils without the help of cataloging their grades by some theory. I had to whip Guy Hawkins to give me a reputation in Lonesome Valley. That was the greatest thing I had done in a community where might made right. In Tiber Valley, my pupils had to win scholastic contests. That was the difference. Now I had a reputation as a teacher in Tiber Valley. We'll stop right there for today. A really exciting, again, part of the book, starting out with him making his way back to Winston there, where he was headed back in the cold, just like when he left, except this time he did go during the daytime. He didn't try to do it at night. And, you know, I said last week, I wonder if he regretted that and if he learned anything. What it says at the beginning of this, he tells us, it says, I learned my lesson. I wouldn't do that again. Although his walk was so cold with the biting wind, it's almost in one way that it was worse than the other. I think it would have been better because it was daylight. It wasn't way up in the middle of the night, which wasn't really way up in the middle of the night, but that snow cloud made it seem like that and everything was dark. So I think being able to see where he was going would have been better, but it sounds like he almost got frostbite. So if it hadn't been for Otis Baylor knowing how to do that with his feet and his hands and to gradually warm them up, I've read that in books. Of course, I've never been frostbite, but I've read that before, that you're not supposed to just, like your instinct is just to put them in hot water, but you need to slowly bring them back. So that was... again, frightening for Jesse, but interesting that Otis and Lucretia, they both were like saying, you know, yeah, everybody knows about it. We're all talking about it, and nobody can't figure out why in the world you'd do this. In other words, why are you so dumb that you would do this? You know, you'd walk in the snowstorm and take a chance on this, and then Lucretia says it must be a girl. You know, that's what would make you do something like that, like if you was in love. But they don't hardly know what to do when he tells them, no, actually, I did it because of your sons, you know, and the other pupils, and I wanted to go get them these books. So it's interesting. You can just kind of see them looking at each other like, what? What the? You know, he's doing this for us. Oh, my goodness. I thought he was going after a girl, but he's doing this for our children. So I liked that part. Oh, and one of my favorite parts, I made a little note that I wanted to read it again, was when they go skating at night, when he's talking about the recreation that they created on their own. I just love the descriptive language of that part. It says, the Tiber River was frozen over. The ring of skates and merry laughter broke the stillness of winter nights. We skated on the white winding ribbon of ice beneath the high, cold winter moon. Often we'd skate until midnight. We'd hear the wind blow mournfully over the great white silence that surrounded us and sing lonesome songs without words in the barren branches of the bankside trees. And we'd hear the foxes barking high up on the walls of sheltering cliffs, mocking the music of our ringing skates. Oh, I just think that's lovely, beautiful, and makes me wish I was there to have seen that. I can't skate. I can't ice skate. I've never tried to ice skate. Not many winters, but there have been a few winters in my lifetime when it was cold enough here that the creeks froze like that. Now, the little Stamy Creek that goes by my house, even if I broke through it in the ice, I'd only go maybe shin deep, maybe knee deep in the deepest places of it. So it's not like a danger of going under and not being able to get out or anything. But there was, during the late 70s and the early 80s, a few times that it froze to the point that me and Paul could go down there and scoot around with our tennis shoes, you know, and act like we were skating. Again, if it had broke through, we would have just been standing in cold water and had to run back to the house. But I really love that scene. Although I didn't ever ice skate, I used to love to roller skate. I adored roller skating, and in my area here, we had a few roller skating rinks. I don't know if the one in Murphy, if it's still open now or not, but I loved it. I think the first time I ever went roller skating was there was one in Blairsville in those days, and I think it had a wood floor. And 4-H, I belonged to 4-H, and 4-H would sometimes take us roller skating and things like that. Then there was one in Murphy, if you're a local person, in the bottom of the Dragon Palace. The Dragon Palace is not there. It's still there, but it's called something else now, but if you remember that. So we would go there and roller skate. And then after that, there was the one in Murphy was over in the what we call Factory Town, but over there by the Learning Center. I don't know if it's still there or not, but I loved roller skate. And I loved it so much. One year I asked for roller skates for Christmas, and Granny and Pap got me a pair, and I think I picked them out of the Sears Roebuck catalog. But I would skate for hours in Granny and Pap's basement, just round in circles, round and around. I loved to skate. I took Corey and Katie when they were young. I think it wasn't 4-H because they weren't part of that. Maybe it was Girl Scouts, some kind of organizational thing that we went, and they hated it. They didn't like it. They were afraid, and I can't remember which one of them fell, which is just part of skating, and then they didn't ever want to do it again. They were done. That was all they needed to do, was that one time. But I'd like to try now. See, it's been years since I've been in roller skates, but I think I could do it. I think I could still do it. But I love that picture, though, that he painted with his words, Jesse did, of skating, and under the moonlight and the lonesome wind and the trees. Oh, just so beautiful, so beautiful. And then he also talks about, for recreation, what they like to do. They like to sled, their sleigh. They could take it and they could go, sounded like a big, long, very long ways they could ride from the top, and then they'd go down over the bank, and then they'd go out actually onto the ice. I love to sled. Now, the last several years, we've not got enough snow not one time to sled in. It's been several years since we got enough snow. But the last one probably was that we got snow at Christmas. Maybe that was that like 2018 or 2019, something like that? Or maybe that was the COVID. Maybe that was 2020. Maybe that was the COVID. I can't remember. I guess it was. Maybe it was during COVID. Anyway, and it was just... That's how snow is here. It's here, and it rarely lasts more than a day or two, and then it's gone. So me and Corey and Katie and Matt did get out and walk in it, but we didn't sled any. But I've been wanting a big snow. If you watch our videos, you know that. The past 2 winters, I've been wanting a big snow, and I've been wanting to sled, and Matt telling me I'm too old to sled. But I really enjoy sledding, and that was one of my favorite things when I was younger in the winter to do. Then when it come time to go win the contest, which they ended up doing, that was another cold day. I'm glad Jesse put that in there. It's interesting because I'm thinking, man, this is really some bitter winters. But he explains this was unusually a bitter winter. Most of the time it wasn't like that, so it was an unusual winter. But so on that day that they were going to go into Lansboro, it turned out that had come another blizzard, and the wind was blowing and whipping the snow around and all that. So... instead of, though, just not going, they just got on their mules and they went. Now, the Leona, she didn't get to go. Her daddy wouldn't let her, and I could imagine I wouldn't want my daughter to do that either, or my son for that matter, because that's a long way, 17 miles, and in that bitter cold, and you don't know what's going to happen. But it's interesting, the difference between then and today. Now, the area where I live, here in southern Appalachia, because I am always begging for snow, wanting it to snow, and so I can go sledding and just to see the beautiful snow. My cousin Clint, he lives in Ohio, and he teases me about how much I like to snow, and he says if you lived in a place where they have to, the snow plows make it into mountains, and then it just sits there, and then they add more to it, and by the end of the winter it's dirty, and it's just, you get tired of it. So he's always teasing me about that. And also about how when it snows here, that's one of the reasons people like me love it, is because everything stops. They don't have school. When I worked at the college, there'd be no work that day. Everything, a lot of places in town will just close up. It just, everything kind of stops, and it forces you to just relax and take it easy. Whereas, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Whereas in Ohio, where Clint's at, when it snows, they just got to keep going because it snows so much, you can't just shut down for the whole winter. But a couple of things is, in our area, because it doesn't snow very often, then our local, like our state department they have a few little snow things, but they don't have enough equipment to take care of a major snowstorm. So it's easier just to do the bare minimum. A lot of times they will scrape the main roads, but the secondary roads, like the one I live on here through Brasstown, they won't just kind of wait, because if you wait a day or two, the sun's going to melt it all. So a lot of times they just do the main roads. Anyway, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, we live in a very, a mountainous area where there's a lot of ups and downs and curves, and so those places are harder to navigate than if it's just a straighter, flatter kind of area. So that's one of the reasons. But them walking, though, made me think of all that. Like when I worked at the college in the marketing department, that was part of my job. If there was a 2-hour delay, if we were canceled, once that decision was made, I was part of the team that had to get that message out. You know, we would do a text message. We would certainly put it on our website and on Facebook. Those were my 2 jobs. So, you know, I was always wanting to get that text or that call to tell me we're not having school, we're not having work, you know, the college is closed today, or it's 2-hour delay or whatever. And just thinking about the difference in the technology. Now, if Jesse and those students had wanted to call and tell Lansboro they wasn't coming, they couldn't have. There was no phones, or certainly no text. There was nobody at Lansboro who could have said, hey, we're having a snow day today, we're not having school, you know, school's out, 2-hour delay, teacher's work day, all those things. So different, you know, they couldn't have called and canceled. Now, Principal Charters, he did say, I can't believe you come, so he probably just kind of assumed that they wouldn't come because of the weather. But such a different time, and, you know, hardy people, that even the students, they wasn't going to let the snow and the cold and the wind stop them. They were going to go no matter what. A very hardy people. And then at the end, there, it is sad that Leona, you know, her daddy, then he felt bad and wished he'd let her go, because everybody's like, they're heroes. You know, we're so proud of them for winning. We're so proud of them for achieving this, when no other rural school had ever tried to even achieve it. It even tried, and then they tried and succeeded. So that was really great. And then one of the reasons that Leona's daddy didn't want her to go was what happened to Billy Leonard. Now, I don't think it happened because of that trip, but later on, probably because that was a bad winter, is that he come down with pneumonia fever, is what Jesse called it. We would say, Granny and Pap would say pneumonia fever. You're going to get pneumonia fever if you're out with a wet head. That's what Granny would say. Don't wash your hair and go outside. You'll take cold, or if it's in the winter, you might get pneumonia fever. But anyway, so that was what Leona's father, I'm sure, was worried about. He didn't want her to get sick. He didn't want her to, you know, be stuck in the snow and freeze to death, but also he didn't want her to get sick. And then, like I said, I don't think it was that trip, but probably something else that caused Billy to get sick, and then he didn't get to go compete at the state. But Budge Waters did, and he won. Wasn't that amazing? Really, really amazing. I hope you enjoyed this part. I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll stop back by next Friday, because we've got to find out what happens to Jesse and his pupils there at the school next.